Would neutralization or demilitarization serve the same purpose?
You know, I don't think there is a trick in the game that hasn't been tried in Israel. We've had demilitarized zones with agreements, signed armistice agreements with our neighbors on one paper, they and we, and we didn't know one day of peace in demilitarized zones. We've had UN observers, we've had the UN emergency force, everything. I don't think there's another gimmick that can be tried. And the result was, after the 48 war, the 56 war, and after the 56 war, the 67 war. And Israel has decided now that as far as it is concerned, this must be the last war. We've won every one of those wars. If we'll be forced into another war, I'm convinced, like everybody in Israel is, we'll win again. But that isn't our ambition, to win wars. We don't want wars.
Well, another very tender point with the Arabs, of course, as you very well know, is East Jerusalem, which has now been legally incorporated into the Jewish city of Jerusalem, in effect.
The city has been unified.
The city has been unified, and there are housing units, 1,000 of them, I think, being built for Jewish families in East Jerusalem. Is this, so far as Israeli opinion and the Israeli government is concerned, another accomplished fact?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go in a little bit into the history of Jerusalem. The resolution of the United Nations, November 47. Everything happens in November in the United Nations. November 47. Jerusalem was to be an international city. Were we overjoyed with that decision? No. A Jewish state without Jerusalem is a distortion of really what it should be. But we accepted it. And 2 or 3 days after that, trouble started in this country, the Arabs attacking us on roads and so on. And in 48, this city that should have been the care of what is called the family of nations was being shelled from Jordan. Not one finger of any hand was lifted in order to save the holiness of the city, let alone its people. If anybody protected Jerusalem in those days, you know it was only we. And by force, by war, because we were weak at that time, the city was cut in half. And the old city was taken over by Jordan. Not because the United Nations decided it should be so. By sheer force. And not one single Jew was allowed to remain there. And when the armistice agreements were signed, and there was a famous Article 8 in the armistice agreement between Jordan and Israel, which said free access to all religious places, to all cultural institutions and humanitarian institutions, and the running of those institutions, which meant especially the Hadassah Hospital on Mount Scopus. The facts were that not one Jew was allowed to go to the Wailing Wall. All Jewish synagogues were destroyed. No Jew was allowed to live there. And the family of nations that decided in 47 that Jerusalem was to be internationalized didn't say a word, didn't do anything, didn't ask Abdullah to leave Jerusalem. He occupied it by force. And it was a horrid sight that in the heart of this holy city was barbed wire separating Jewish Jerusalem from Arab Jerusalem. And on 5th of June, King Hussein got a message sent to him by the late Prime Minister Levi Eshkol through General Bull, telling him, if you keep out, nothing will happen to you. But as King Hussein published himself afterwards, his memoirs of those days, he said he received a cable that morning from President Nasser saying the Egyptian planes are bombing all of Israel, come in. The water is good. Step in. And he did. And this time, we united Jerusalem. And there's no doubt in the mind of any Muslim or any Christian, as far as the access to the holy places are concerned, they are guaranteed 100%. Even more so, we have no ambition or desire that we should manage any of those holy places. We're perfectly willing and prepared and anxious to see that those to whom these places are holy and sacred, they should be those responsible for those places.
Speaking now of Arab governments or of Muslim and other and Christian religious parties?
First place, as far as the Christian holy places are concerned, there are Christian churches and so on. As far as the religious Muslim places are concerned, we wouldn't mind who it is. If Jordan is supposed to represent that, well then certainly some arrangement with the holy Muslim places will be under their jurisdiction, not territorial jurisdiction, but jurisdiction over the holy places. Certainly that wouldn't be a problem.
About the other places that have been mentioned, you have said that Israel will not in the future depend on others to protect her navigation rights. Does that mean that you require some sort of military position on the Strait of Tiran or some kind of military guarantee on the Suez Canal?
The guarantee we got in 1957 with the UN emergency force stationed. One of the things in my life that I'm not very proud of is the fact that I had to make the statement on behalf of government, of course. March 1st, 1957, the Assembly of the United Nations, a statement of hopes and aspirations, and I cannot pride myself that it was I who had made up this statement. Every word and every comma and every dot was cleared with the late Mr. Dulles, and he in turn cleared it with other maritime powers. And only after that, the guarantees of maritime powers and the United States, I got up and made this statement that we are prepared to withdraw from the Sharm el-Sheikh with hopes and aspirations and on conditions that the UN emergency force remains there until the situation becomes normal, which means that there is peace and boats will pass freely. And I said in that statement, which was also agreed, that if our shipping will be disturbed, our boats attacked, we will then act in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations, which means self-defense. That was accepted. Well, what happened afterwards, you know. On the 23rd of May, 1967, Nasser asked the UN people of Sharm el-Sheikh to go home, and that was the end of Israel shipping.
So in the future, what precautions are you going to take?
When we are there.
When you are there. Let's turn from territory.
And when we'll be there, everybody's ships will go through the Straits of Tiran.
Let's turn from places and territories to talk about people for a moment. The 1967 United Nations resolution also called for a just settlement of the refugee problem. What would you regard as just, or what is Israel prepared to do about the Arab refugees?
With your permission, may I also make some comments on the subject of refugees? The world, some because they don't know, and some because it is easier to forget, think of refugees in this area, that in 1948, an Arab refugee problem was created. That's true. Created by the Arab states. But it isn't true that that was the only refugee problem. There was a Jewish refugee problem. When the State of Israel was established, that same day, there were 300,000 Jewish refugees 3 years after the war was over, and Hitler was no more. 300,000 Jews in the camps in Germany, in Italy, and in Cyprus. There they were 3 years after the war, those in the European camps, in Germany especially, in those very camps where they saw their nearest and their dearest gassed and buried alive and so on. And there were Arab refugees who left the area that was supposed to be Israel because of the war that the Arab states declared. What has happened to these two groups of refugees? But in addition to these 300,000 Jews, refugees, we have absorbed, received into our country, hundreds of thousands from Arab Muslim countries. Iraq, Yemen, Libya, from the caves in Libya, Morocco, Tunis, Syria, Lebanon, and so on. More Jews have come from Arab countries than the number of Arabs that left what was Israel territory. What have we done with our people? They came in rags. They came with diseases. They came, many of them illiterate, very many of them. Very, very few with any skills of any kind. We were 650,000 Jews in the country. This was not a highly developed country in industry and so on. This was a country under the British mandate that was importing food products. The little food that we grew in our country, we shared with these people. We immediately introduced a very strict austerity program. Shared everything, rationing in food, in clothes, in shoes, in furniture, everything, because we wanted to share. We got help from the outside. We got help from Jews. We got help from the United States government. We put these people to work. We put them into agriculture. We organized agricultural villages. They weren't farmers. They didn't know the first thing about farming. If we now export agricultural products to Europe, and we do, a lot of it is due to them. They've become good farmers now. We not only rehabilitated them, but we have turned them into a very important element of developing the country. What has happened on the other side? They were put into camps. UNRWA has poured millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into those camps. Where's Arab solidarity? Where are the royalties, some of the royalties in Kuwait and of Saudi Arabia? Where's the brotherhood of trying to absorb them? Believe me, the difference between a European Jew in Israel and a Yemenite Jew that came, the clash of centuries, there's no clash between an Arab that lived on this side of the Jordan and went over on the other side of the Jordan. It's the same religion, the same language, the same way of life. And they didn't come in rags. And they didn't come diseased. But we accepted our refugees as brothers. We wanted them. We wanted to see that they become productive human beings. On the other side, they were kept in misery as a weapon against us, and that was more important than humanitarian considerations.
But even so, Israel is prepared, I believe, to make some contribution to the solution of this.
Despite that, we said, first place, throughout the years we have been receiving some refugees, all in all over 40,000, what we call the reunion of families. In addition to that, we have said right along, in the United Nations and everywhere else, that we are prepared towards the solution of the refugee problem to pay compensation for land and buildings and houses and everything that was left behind these refugees. There's never any discussion on that. That we're prepared. But we say that the problem must be a regional solution and not for Israel to open the doors, because these refugees would march in now as an army.
You mentioned something a moment ago that I'd like to go back to. You have repeatedly called on the Arabs to sit down face to face, and negotiate a settlement, and the Arabs have steadfastly refused. Is that, to you, the only acceptable method of reaching an agreement?
Yes, and it's not a matter of technique, but if they don't want to sit down with us, it means they haven't yet accepted us. Let us say they haven't acquiesced.
It's a symbolic thing that you're seeking.
No, it's symbolic, but it's very much of the essence. If they sit down and negotiate with us, then one accepts it that they have come to the conclusion that after trying to throw us into the sea 3 times in 20 years, now they're prepared to live with us. And that's what's important.
What is it?
Because unless they're prepared for that, then there's no peace.
Well, what is the particular merit also of a peace treaty or a peace contract, some sort of contractual agreement, rather than, let us say, a simple exchange of declarations through a third party?
Well, it's the same. We're coming back exactly to the same thing. If and when the Arabs are prepared, have made up their minds to live in peace with us, then there's no reason why then we should sit down. After all, we're either parties concerned. We'll discuss borders. We'll discuss refugees. We'll discuss every problem on the agenda. And reach an agreement, sign this agreement, and we'll live in peace after that. If they're not prepared to do it, then it's again some kind of a makeshift that has led to 2 wars after the first war of liberation, and will pave the way for a 4th war. Something, as I said before, we are absolutely decided this will not happen. I believe that one of the essential differences between us and our Arab neighbors is our attitude to people. For instance, we have won all these wars. Why was there no celebration after the 5th of June, this war? Because people pay even for a victory in war. And pay something that is very, very dear, is the lives of young boys. It's our sons. And our sons came back not only in a mood of sorrow after this great victory, of sorrow because they saw their very close friends near them fall in battle, but also because they had to shoot and kill others. This their fathers did in 48 and fell in battle. These boys were left orphans, and now they went to war. In 56, their elder brothers went to war. Now they went to war. Now they are again orphans. We refuse to do anything which will say to our, now for me, for my generation, to my grandchildren. I was in Haganah. My son and daughter were in Haganah when they were 12 or 13 years old. And then the Second World War. And then the struggle for independence. And now I have to raise my grandchildren or see them grow with this shadow of war over their heads. If it'll come, it'll come, but I refuse to help it to come.
You've already indicated that you think that the peace should be made by the participants in the struggle themselves, and you indicated also your disapproval, I think, of the efforts by the 4 great powers to find a peace formula for the Middle East. Could you tell us exactly why you are so opposed to the 4-power discussions?
For 2 reasons. One, on a matter of broad principle, I do not believe, nor do I accept, the right of any powers, large or small, to decide the fate of others. According to the Charter of the United Nations, all countries are equal. Everyone has one vote. But small countries should know their place, and everybody is equal, but some are more so. And we know our place. We're a small country. But I maintain that in one thing, every country is equal. Every people is equal in its right to decide its own fate, in its right of sovereignty. If it's a small country, it's a sovereignty over a small country. A small people, a small sovereign people. The larger, the richer, are more fortunate. But the right of sovereignty is equal for all. We have no quarrel with the United States.
Let me ask you about that point. Has the willingness of the United States to enter into these four-power discussions disturbed your relations with the United States or impaired them in any way?
No. You know, with our friends, the difference between our friends and our enemies, with our friends, we sometimes have differences of opinion, so we discuss it with them. With our enemies, we don't talk. I mean, they don't talk to us. The United States is the greatest friend we have. And we have differences of opinion, but we're friends. Now, there's another reason why we're against the four. Look at the composition of the four. Of course, immediately say, well, there are two against you and two for you. But that isn't right. Russia, that is not only, say in British understatement, unfriendly to Israel, I think that Russia is at least as responsible as the Arabs in the '67 war, maybe more so. That fiction that they spread, and they knew that they were spreading fiction, of the Israel army massed on the Syrian border, prepared to attack Syria, and therefore Egypt must come and save Syria. They knew that there wasn't a particle of truth in it. They were banging away on the radio in the Arab language for hours and hours and excited the Arabs. Nasser probably didn't believe it, but the others believed it. His people believed it. The Syrians believed it. Now they sit there. And to my great sorrow, France is a different France after '67. But, so these two have voted right down the line against Israel on everything. Russia for all the years, and France has quickly caught up with Russia during the last 2 years. So they're against Israel, pro-Arab. The United States and Britain are friends of Israel. They're not anti-Arab. They won't do anything, and shouldn't, to hurt the Arabs. They're friends of Israel. But they're certainly friends of the Arabs. I don't think Britain would say that they're more friends of Israel than they are of Jordan. I don't think that they would say that they are anti-Egypt. So what do you have? You have two that are fair. The friends of Israel, the friends of the Arabs. You have two that are anti-Israel.
Well, as the Jerusalem Post said the other day, you don't like the arithmetic of the situation.
They put it that way.
In essence, it seems to me that what you're asking of the world at large is a sort of benevolent neutrality while you and the Arabs get together and settle accounts between yourselves. If that's a fair statement, I don't quite understand how you're going to entice the Arabs to the peace talks. How are you going to get them to the table?
Well, I don't want neutrality on the part of large powers or small powers. I think what they should do is to try, whatever is in their power, to get the parties who are involved in the struggle to sit down and make peace. I once said it at the meeting that only those that met on the battlefield should sit down around a table and discuss their affairs, because it concerns us and them. And nobody, it doesn't concern anybody else at any rate as vitally as it does us. And I think that if efforts were put in to try and convince the Arab states to sit down with us. Maybe they would have succeeded, I'm not sure. But unless and until the Arabs are prepared to sit down with us, then there is no hope that anything radical will happen. And I think if the Arabs were faced with this situation, either you sit down with the Israelis and try to reach a peace agreement with them, or things remain as they are.
Someone said the other day that the Arabs won't make peace and they can't make war, but they would make a great deal of propaganda.
Look, propaganda, I once had a long discussion with the late Mr. Hammarskjöld. I said, look, Nasser makes these terrible speeches against us and incites his young people to a great ideal. They must grow up to fight Israel and throw Israelis into the sea. He says, why do you listen to what he says? After all, these are only words. But I said, look, as long as he makes these speeches, he's not prepared to make peace with us, he's educating a new generation that won't want to make peace with us. But propaganda is not important, really. Shooting is more dangerous.
Shortly before his death, your predecessor, whom you mentioned earlier, Prime Minister Eshkol, told Newsweek that Israel didn't want any part of the settled area captured from Jordan on the west bank of the Jordan River. Is that now established government policy?
The Israel cabinet, the Israel government, under Levi Eshkol, to my mind, accepted and lived up to a very, very wise policy, and I hope that I won't spoil it. And that is that after we have said that we are prepared and want agreed borders, secure, but also agreed borders, and as long as the Arabs won't talk to us, there's no reason whatsoever why we should go into any discussion or any game of drawing maps. With whom? Either we should discuss it among ourselves in Israel, that would be rather silly, or with our friends with whom we did not have any war. The only ones with whom we have to decide on boundaries or agree on boundaries are with our Arab neighbors. And when we say we want agreed borders, then there's room to talk. And since they won't talk, why should we begin arguing and bargaining about borders either among ourselves or with our friends who are not directly concerned to these borders?
Well, there's one possibility here that interests me, and I'd like to ask you about. It seems to me that if peace is a long time coming, that Israel may be obliged by circumstances either to absorb some of these territories, which she may not wish to have, or at least to assume full governmental responsibility for them. Can they simply be left to stagnate, if you like, for 5, 10, or 15 years while the Arabs hold back from the peace table?
First place, maybe we are more optimistic than you are and think that the solution will come before years will have passed. And the second place, I don't say that it doesn't create problems. There are problems. That is the truth, that there are problems. But in the third place, we are trying to do everything we can to not only not worsen their situation. I think we have in some cases already improved. I think agriculture, for instance, in some of the areas is improved because we brought in modern methods.
But isn't there some disagreement in your cabinet as to the policy to be followed, that is, particularly with bringing Arab refugees and others to work inside Israel, inside the borders of Israel?
Well, I want to tell you one thing that we are all agreed upon, and that is that the only government to whom the Arabs in the various areas can turn with their problems and their needs is the Israel government, naturally. Therefore, we are responsible. We're responsible mainly and primarily in the question of employment and education and services and so on. Some of us say it is preferable, to the extent that it is possible, to create places of employment on the spot in the areas, even if we have to do a bit of development even in industries or other...
that is investment, Israeli investment in the...
Israeli investment or other investment, foreign investment, we don't know. We don't have so much to invest. But to create places there until they have employment there. And unless we create them, thousands of Arabs work here. The difference is that somebody that comes from Nablus or from Jenin or from other areas, whereas before he got 2, 3, or 4 Israeli pounds per day, now he gets 15 or 16.
Well, since we've mentioned the cabinet, let me ask you one quick, short, final question. You've been asked many times. You've been prime minister now, I think, for only 5 or 6 weeks. Are you a candidate to succeed yourself after the elections, the parliamentary elections in November?
I've been asked this question, but for instance, if somebody had asked me 2 or 3 months ago, have I any ambitions to be prime minister, I would have laughed out loud. I had no intentions of starting a new political career at my age, and generally never in my long life have I planned a career for myself. I belong to a party. I'm a disciplined member of my party, always have been.
That's a good note, I might say, for a party member to end on, because reluctantly and apologetically, I must interrupt. The hour has been a fascinating one, but it's over.
I'm glad you have to interrupt at this point.
I'm sorry I have to. Thank you, Madam Prime Minister, and goodbye from the Knesset in Jerusalem.
National Educational Television and the New York Times has presented News in Perspective. Special edition, Prime Minister Golda